Finally, we come to our Israeli keynote. Major General in Reserves Yaakov Amidror. Yaakov Amidror is a very, very well-known strategic thinker and analyst in Israel, who was well-versed also in issues pertaining to nuclear proliferation and the Iran nuclear file. After retiring from the IDF after a long service in the IDF in 2002, he was a senior research fellow at the Institute for Middle East Research in Washington. For more than 2.5 years, from 2011 to 2013, he served as National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister and head of the National Security Council. He's currently the Anne and Greg Rosshandler Senior Fellow at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategic Studies, and he's as well as a Distinguished Fellow of JINSA in Washington, D.C. Yaakov Amidror, please.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here. We are dealing today with two different proliferation problems. Both of them have been mentioned here by others. One is how to prevent Iran from having military nuclear capability. It's in the center of our efforts since 95. In 94, we found the beginning of the efforts of the Iranians. In 95, we transferred to the Americans all the evidence. It took the Americans 2 years to agree with us that the Iranians are in this area. And since then, we are trying to prevent the Iranians from reaching this capability. It is clear for us today, even more than in the past, after we brought to Israel the Iranian archive, that the Iranians were very, very serious in their efforts. If you ask me if I have one impression from the archive, in one sentence, is that the Iranians were more serious than we thought in all their efforts. If it is about enriching, if it is about weaponization, whatever. And it is clear today that all their efforts to deny, even the story of the fatwa, is part of their policy to lie to the world. The last attempt, by the way, is a very successful one, when they said that Saudi Arabia was attacked by proxies, by, Houthis, blah, blah, blah. It is direct Iranian attack, which was done from Iran by Iranians. But the world is preferring to close eyes and to say, we don't understand, we are not sure, we don't know. But after reading the archives, no one can deny that the Iranians were very strong in their capabilities and their abilities and their efforts to reach it. They got some help from people around the world, even if not formally by states. Some Russians helped them, some Chinese helped them, and others. And the Iranians didn't stop their efforts. And they still have in mind this plan and this goal to have nuclear military capability. And in the center of our efforts is to prevent Iran from having it. The question is it success of Israel, or did we fail to stop the Iranians? The answer is more complicated. When we came first time to the Americans in 95, we spoke about schedule of between 10 to 15 years. It means that towards the end of the 2010, the Iranians supposed to have this capability. By the way, from the archive it understood that we will write about the schedule. And we are now almost 10 years later than they supposed to have this capability, and they don't have it. So if you ask yourself, that was a success in a way, yes, we gained a lot of time. But we failed to stop the Iranians because the world was not ready to take the measures which were needed to stop the Iranians. And from this point of view, the agreement which was signed in 2015 was a very bad agreement, because it gave the Iranians 10 years to prepare themselves with new generation of centrifuges to enhance their missiles capabilities. And with all due respect, I don't see the dialogue between the Europeans and the Iranians stopping the Iranians from having this capability. It's like the critical dialogue that the Europeans had with the Iranians many years ago. It was a critical dialogue in which both sides criticized the Americans. That was the critical dialogue. Do you see the dialogue between Europe and Iran stopping the Iranian project of long-range missiles? We have to look at the realities and to understand. It cannot be stopped by that. Either you put sanctions or use force, or understand that they will have long-range missiles. Based, by the way, the first technology was built in North Korea, if you want to see the connection. This is the first project that we are in, is to stop the Iranians from having these nuclear military capabilities. The second one, which is not less important from our point of view, and it was mentioned indirectly when you speak about the proliferation of missiles all around the Middle East. It's to stop the Iranians from building a ring of fire around the state of Israel. And this is what they have in mind. One element is Hezbollah in Lebanon. The second element is the independent Iranian war machine in Syria, will be connected by 10,000s of Shiites militias, which will be located either in Syria or in Lebanon or both, and land corridor going from Iran through Iraq into Syria and Lebanon. And it is there on the ground, with or without American forces there. And Israel is working very hard to stop this project of the Iranian from being implemented on the ground. There is no state like called Lebanon. It's an institution, not a state. There is no really sovereign state called Syria. The Iranians doing in Syria whatever they want. And we understand that there is a strong connection between nuclear Iran and the ring of fire around Israel. Under nuclear umbrella, the Iranians will be free to do whatever they want in the Middle East, including to build this ring of fire and to use it against Israel in the future. And we understand if they succeed to build this ring of fire around Israel, no one in Israel will have the ability to decide to stop the Iranian nuclear program. So there is a strong connection between the efforts of the Iranians to have their nuclear military capability and the efforts of the Iranians to build this ring of fire around Israel. They help each other to be implemented at the end. And this is why for us it's very important to stop both of them. We will be more than happy to cooperate with friends around the world. But in many cases we found ourselves that all the burden is on our shoulders. And we understand that it might come a situation in which we will have to act directly in Iran to stop the Iranians. Because the world is not ready to look at it and say, this is the problem and this is the way to solve it. And prefer to close eyes. I remember a meeting many years ago with Amos Yalin. He was the head of the intelligence, and I came to visit him and he said, Amidror, I'll find the smoking gun. And I say, Amos, with all due respect, you can find the gun. If it is a smoking one or not, it's not you to decide. Someone else will have to decide if this is a smoking gun. And the world is not ready to call it a smoking gun, because the question will be, okay, if it's a smoking gun, what do you do? And no one is ready to act. So we might find ourselves again, not just in Syria and in Lebanon, but also in Iran itself, that we will have to make the job because the world is not ready to do it. It's very costly, it's very problematic, it's not going to be easy, it might be very, very, very dangerous one. But at the end of the day, when it is coming to the existence of the State of Israel, I don't see any other decision makers doing something different than that in Israel. And this is the connection between both sides. Remember, we are speaking about NGOs. Military NGOs, but NGOs. Hezbollah is an NGO, Hamas is an NGO, Islamic Jihad is an NGO. NGOs with more than 100,000 rockets and missiles. It's a number that you don't see in all NATO, excluding the United States of America. And now what they are doing is to make each of them more accurate and to surround it with the most sophisticated weapon system that the Syrians bought from the Russians, from anti-tank missiles like Kornet that you can find in the hands of Hamas and Hezbollah, to anti-air missiles, anti-ship missiles, and so on and so forth. And we understand that it is not going to be easy to deal with it. And we understand that it is not easy to stop it. But what is the alternative? The Chief of Staff, the previous Chief of Staff said that we striked in Syria more than 200 times. And people around the world say the Israelis are violating blah, 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 blah. What is the alternative? To let the Iranians to build their independent war machine in Syria? Who will stop them? Not NATO, not the Americans, not the Russians. And at the end of the day, we find ourselves again in a situation in which no one is ready to take part in the effort to stop the Iranians from building the independent war machine in Syria, and we have to do it. What they need in Syria for long-range missiles. Who is the enemy that they are coming to fight in Syria with long-range missiles? The rebels. Anyhow, the Russians are doing the job. Turkey. And they are very clear about it when they say, yes, we want to destroy Israel. They are not hiding their goal at the end of the day. They are saying it loudly and clearly, yes, we want to destroy Israel. So this is, when we speak about non-proliferation, it's two different areas which are very much connected. One is clearly about the classical one, to prevent Iran from being nuclear. The second one is not the classical one, is not to let the Iranians to implement their goal to build around Israel the ring of fire. After the agreement which was signed with the Iranians in the Middle East, and it was mentioned here, there is another kind of proliferation that should be dealt with. And in this case, I don't see Israel can do it by itself. There are at least 3 countries, and maybe 4, which are very clear about their will to have the same capabilities that the Iranians have. They can reach uranium, according to the agreement, by the way. We want to enrich uranium. They can have long-range missiles. We want to have long-range missiles. They will have, after the agreement, the legitimacy to go ahead with their project. We want to build this project in our country. It was said by Turkey, by Egypt, by Saudi Arabia, and maybe some Gulf countries. And think about the Middle East. The Europeans and the Americans, think about the Middle East and the Russians, in which will be at least 4 countries with nuclear capability: Iran, Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. Do you want to reach this situation, to live in this world in which those 4 countries have nuclear capability with long-range missiles that can reach Moscow, Berlin, and maybe in the future the United States of America? If you don't want it, stop Iran. Without the Iranians' capability, no one in the Middle East is dreaming about having this capability. In the past, they didn't speak about it. But it is clear, if the main Shiite country will have it, how the main Arab country, the biggest Arab country, Egypt, will not have it. Or those who dream to be the leaders of the Sunnis in Ankara or in Istanbul will not have it. In Saudi Arabia, the richest Arab country. So if you want to stop this process from being materialized in the Middle East, the only way to do it is to stop Iran from purchasing nuclear military capability. If you don't do it, that will be the Middle East that we will have to live in, and you will be his neighbors. So at the end, Israel is now in different 2 efforts relating to proliferation, but we know and we understand that if we will not succeed to stop the Iranians, and the world will not help us to do it, we might face a different situation in which the whole Middle East will be covered with countries with nuclear capabilities. And now it's not a secret. It's said publicly by the Turks, by Egyptians, by Saudis, and I believe that the Gulf countries will not remain behind. I don't know, but I don't believe. My assessment is that they will join the effort. And you know what? Because you allowed it to the Iranians, why should they don't have it? If the Iranians have it, why Turkey will not have it? Or Egypt, or Saudi Arabia? I can understand their argument. So if you want to stop them, the first effort should be to stop the Iranians from having that, and then the chance to stop the others will be much stronger. We understand that to act against proliferation, military means is not the only means that should be used. And other means should be used by the world. Economic pressure, help in some areas. We are not speaking about efforts to build the electricity capability connected to nuclear reactor and so on. So we understand that this is something that might be monitored by the world. But at the end of the day, when it is coming to monitoring, ask all the questions that should be asked about the agency in Vienna. They failed the whole way. After the agreement was signed, we had been promised by the Americans that they will change the monitoring system of the agency in Vienna. It will be much more tight and close and everything that could be promised. But ask yourself if this is the truth. What happened when we gave places and addresses to be checked by the IAEA? Where are the results? What they did with the result after they found that there was enriched uranium in one of these places? What was the result? What the world is doing? Leave alone the agreement. It is clear that the Iranians are cheating and lied, and there was in this place enriched uranium. It's not our assessment. It was found by the formal agency in Vienna. What the world reaction was? None. Zero. Where is the verification? Where is the monitoring? Where is the whole system? So, if you speak about non-proliferation, if you want to be active in this area, you have to build something which is much more stronger and can be take a real efforts to really stop countries like Iran. It's not just Iran, it's countries like Iran. So at the end, the non-proliferation efforts are part of our philosophy and efforts in the last at least 25 years. We cannot say that we succeeded, but we gained time for Israel and for the world. The question is how this time will be used by the world in the future, because we don't want to find ourselves again standing alone in these efforts against Iran and other countries that might go the same way that the Iranians did. Questions, if you have.
I heard the word deterrence a couple of times in the NATO presentation, and I heard it once in another one. I'm wondering what you think of as deterrence, what's effective deterrence in this period. I'm thinking of, if you move those chemical weapons, you'll be bombed. Or if you use those chemical weapons, you'll be bombed. And these are things that the American administration said and then didn't enforce on that level. What kind of enforcement mechanisms of deterrence are required in order to have a regime of behavior in the world that is, I guess, back to where it was before? Is that possible?
It's possible if the world will be ready to open eyes, to call the problem a problem and not to close eyes, because they understand that the second question will be, okay, what do you do about it? And today, this is the world. People around the world are not ready to look at the problem, to say this is the problem, to define it, and to ask the question, okay, what can we do to stop? And because it's not happening, look at the reaction of the world after the attack on Saudi Arabia. Look at the reaction after the use of chemical weapon in Syria, and so on and so forth. So these leaders understand that nice words, but nothing is done. Yes, please.
General, thank you very much for your speech, and I understand you want to protect your country, and I can totally
Thank you very much.
Totally respect that. It makes total sense.
By the way, we did it in '48, and we don't ask anyone then.
Yes, totally.
That was the last time that we got to the United Nations. Since then, we don't ask.
But the problem with this approach is countries in the end make their sovereign decisions. Mm-hmm. And we've seen over and over again that if a country makes a serious determination to acquire nuclear weapons, like DPRK did, they will acquire nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. They will eat grass, as former Prime Minister of Pakistan said, but they will build nuclear weapons. So anything short of war and occupation will not stop a determined country with resources from going nuclear. So then there is the question, if there are no resources for attack and occupation of Iran, which there are no, what else are your options? Because whatever, we got the deal, as you said, it might be imperfect, but as you said, it bought us time. There was no progress in Iranian nuclear program during this time. Whatever the US administration has been doing for the last couple of years is increasing, again, Iranian nuclear program. Iran is emboldened to act in the region. We've seen attacks against Saudi Arabia, against tankers, and this is paying off. Saudis and Emiratis are now more open for dialogue with Iran on security in the region, not less. So whatever is happening now is obviously not getting you closer to the things you've been preaching for getting Iran not to get nuclear weapons. So what's your plan then?
I agree that we cannot do what Russia did in Crimea. We cannot conquer the area. We have to deal with the situation as it is. And we know our limitations. We have a policy, very clear one. It helps us to postpone the Iraqi attempt to have nuclear capability for many, many years. As you know, it helps us to stop the Syrians from building their reactor for, I don't know for how many years. Yes, we know that at the end of the day, it's a question of time. We are not Russia. We are not the United States of America. We are not a superpower. And yes, we are buying time. And if it will have to do it again, we will do it again. And during this time, it very much depends what we do with our capabilities. And we try to build more capabilities during those years. And we know that unlike superpowers, we cannot solve problems by conquering Berlin. We cannot reach the Berlin of the Middle East. It's behind our capacity. And we play on time. It's true, you are right. Well, I don't see any alternative. I mean, we had another alternative before 48, and we learned the lesson, and we don't intend to be in the same situation. Yes, please.
General Amidror, thanks so much for your talk. 2 questions. First of all, what advantage was gained by Donald Trump leaving the nuclear deal? Everything you're sketching out, and the complexity and the difficulty of the problem, is after the U.S. left the deal. So what was the advantage gained by leaving the deal? Second question, the way you phrased the argument, you said if the Europeans and the international community don't do anything to solve this problem, Israel will have to do it. You frame it as if it's a threat. But if I'm sitting in Moscow or Washington or Brussels or Berlin or Paris or London, it sounds to me like a promise. You're basically saying you don't need to do anything to solve this problem. You can free ride off of Israel because ultimately Israel will resolve this on its own. That might sound great to Putin. For that matter, might sound great to Donald Trump. What incentive do these countries really have, if that's the case, to solve the problem? And what leverage does Israel have on them to get them to solve the problem?
About the first question, you should not ask me. It was not an Israeli decision. It was an American decision. Ask the Americans, and I'm sure that they have very good answer to your question. We have to live with the consequences. And by the way, the aggressiveness of Iran was in much greater level after the agreement than before the agreement. If you look what happened in the Middle East, you could see the difference of the way that the Iranians behave in the Middle East before the agreement in 15 and after the agreement. And no question that after the agreement, the level of their aggressiveness was higher. I'm not saying that it is because of the agreement. I'm not stupid enough to think that it is because of it. But the agreement gave them some insurances that they can do actions that they did in the past, and no one will. And it was said almost openly that for not endangering the agreement, we let them to play. So I'm quite sure that not the pulling out of the Americans from the agreement is the reason for the aggressiveness of the Iranians, on the contrary. And yes, without the world putting a military option on the table, nothing will help. With all due respect, the Iranians are not going to be convinced by dialogue with the Europeans, not even by dialogue with the Americans. The nuclear, at the end of the day, even the agreement with the Americans in 15 was achieved because Obama, unlike his previous administrations, ordered the American military forces to provide a military option. And they did. It was not used. And at the end, in the negotiations, the Americans lost their cards because they had been very weak in the negotiation. The minute that the Iranians understood that the Americans want the agreement more than the Iranians need the agreements, and the Iranians needed the agreement. But they understood the Americans want the agreement more than they need it, they lost the negotiations. I don't know what the Americans have in mind. Will they put on the table a military option or not? It's an American decision. At the end, we cannot make this so sophisticated. We will say that we will not solve it, so to force the Americans and Putin to solve it, and then it will be solved, so we don't need, with all due respect. We say, we play it very, very open. Israel should not, this is my view, Israel should not let the Iranians to have military nuclear capability. If it will be solved by any other means, thank God. If not, we will not have any chance, any choice. It's not because we want it, but we will not have any choice, and we will have to use military capability to stop the Iranians. Is it the best solution? No. For sure no. We told the Americans before they signed the agreement, I can quote myself, in the White House, telling the Americans very clearly, we prefer that you will solve it with a good agreement. We are not a trigger-happy guys that want to use military force. Only if we will not have any other way to solve it, we will use it. If it will be solved in another way by the Europeans, by dialogue, by the American sanctions, by I don't know what, we'll be more than happy. But all the time, we as Israelis should not lie to ourselves. At the end of the day, we have to build legitimacy inside Israel and to prepare ourselves, and it costs a lot of money, to the situation in which we will have to do what Israel stands for, to defend ourselves by ourselves. And we are not cheating, we are not playing, the sophisticated way. We will say no, so the Americans, the Russians will understand that there is no any other alternative, so they will solve the truth. It doesn't work like that way, with all due respect. At least I don't believe that it is works this way. Yes, please.
Okay, we had for the last, from the 50s, 60s, a fair balance between Russia and United States that worked well. Both have nuclear weapons. Why don't you think we could also have a fair balance between
very good
or
question.
maybe, and I quote Yuval Harari, that you can't trust a fundamentalist regime that believe in life after death to have nuclear weapons. Please.
I think that Yuval is right about that. But there is something more fundamental. Rafsanjani was one of the best thinkers in Iran, said once, Israel is a one-bomb state. To build on that something which is equivalent to what was between Russia and America, with all due respect, that will not be my recommendation to the decision makers. I don't know if you think that it is good enough. I don't think it's good enough.
We have just one more question here.
Between Macron calling NATO brain dead and Secretary Pompeo saying that Iran is going for a breaking point with the nuclear situation, and elections in the United States, what is the time frame between a year and 3 months that we should be looking at some kind of a surprise?
I don't know. I'm not making, assumptions about timetables. This is my students and subordinates. They're sitting there. They have a responsibility. I don't. And they're making all the calculations in the intelligence. Here, the details are more important than the assumptions. Depends what happened really in Iran and what they are doing, what they are not doing, and so on and so forth. I don't have any clue idea about timetable.
Okay, thank you very much. And with that, we close this portion of the conference. Thank you all for coming, and hope to see you all tomorrow as well. Thank you.